in the world. And I'll take a couple of minutes to explain what I mean by this. If you look at the Human Development Index, there's plenty to be happy about. If you look at the last 150 years, starting from 1570, there's been remarkable progress practically in every region of the world. But if you were to look at some of these countries, and if you were to exclude the OECD countries and go down to something like Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Asia, excluding Japan and China, you see that the increments in the Human Development Index haven't been dramatic. Similarly, for GDP per capita, if you were to look at countries in North America, Australia, New Zealand, and Western Europe, you see much more dramatic increases in GDP as compared to other areas like Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Middle East, and so on. This is a very sobering report, and for those of you who have not read this, I will earnestly urge you to go through this World Inequality Report, which came a month or two back, which looks at global income and wealth inequality, and this is 2021 data. So what it effectively means is that the top 10% of the world, the top richest 10% of the world is responsible for 52% of the global income, whereas the bottom 50% account for just 8.5% of the world income. It is even more stark when it comes to wealth. The top 10% of the world owns 76% of the global wealth, and the bottom 50% own 2% of the global wealth. If you were to look at the concentration of capital and wealth inequality across the world, you realize that the discrepancy between the richest and the poorest actually gets worse as the income level of the country goes lower, which means that in countries like Latin America, MENA, Russia, Central Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, the discrepancy between the richest and the world actually widens compared to countries in Europe and other parts of Asia. So clearly showing that inequality is real, and even within low middle income countries, there is huge inequalities. And again, this is a graphical representation of the bottom 50, top 10 income gaps across the world. So clearly showing that inequality. So what I'm talking about is not the top 10% who have access to the best solutions in the world, but the bottom 50% on whom I strongly believe that digital health solutions should be focused upon. So I'll show you a few examples of some real world situations where we decided to focus within the Tata Memorial and the National Cancer Grid on where digital health solutions. And these solutions might look rudimentary and very primitive to you in comparison to some of the examples that you saw earlier on, both by in my own talk as well as by previous speakers. But when you look at impact, that is what we need to measure as a true measure of whether a digital health solution is important or not. So to me, looking at real world problems, very clear problem definition, offering realistic solutions, and looking at the top 10 versus the bottom 50%. And I think, Dr. Soumya, when you look at the Cancer Moonshot, which was launched with great fanfare by several organizations, including MD Anderson, the most recent by President Biden of the United States, what I would urge digital health to look at is while you continue to look for moonshots, also look at Earth shots, which is looking at real world problems and finding solutions to them. So some of the initiatives that we've been involved in within the National Cancer Grid has been to look at quality assurance in surgical pathology, which is looking at web-enabled services where quality assurance and a system of accreditation of member centers within the National Cancer Grid is enabled, with over 150 centers participating in this quality assurance program. So by doing a very simple intervention of improving the quality of pathology reporting, you're automatically transforming the care that you offer to hundreds of thousands of patients across the length and breadth of the country. We've more recently expanded this quality assurance program to include molecular pathology as well. The next point that I want to talk about is online learning. We have the NCG Quality Improvement Program, which is a blended learning program. Learning is something that most people don't think about when it comes to digital health, and this is something that I strongly urge all of you to think, not just by blended learning and online learning courses. We also have simulations, we have augmented reality to supplement these, mimicking a real life situation much better than what we otherwise would. Sudeep did speak briefly about the expert opinion service. This is again a web-enabled service from the Tata Memorial and the National Cancer Grid, where we offer expert opinion service which is based both on AI, based on available evidence collated from the top trials, clinical trials in the world, but also looks at expert oncologists' opinions to further refine their choices. tumor boards, which started much before COVID, though this became popular in many parts of the world during COVID. We started 6 or 7 years back. We've had over 600 tumor boards which have been conducted so far within the National Cancer Grid, which not only benefits the patient whose clinical case is getting discussed, but also serves as a continuing medical education program for those who are involved in participating in this. Looking at very simple solutions like collating library resources through a discovery tool, making it very searchable, thereby democratizing cancer education across the National Cancer Grid members. A massive open online course, which we run under the ncgeducation.in portal, where we collate educational material from several of the NCG centers and thereby help disseminate this, again, democratizing medical education. So this is an effort that we are fairly proud of. This is something which we started as a proof of concept working on patient health records and interoperability 2 or 3 years back, where we looked at a very simple pilot project, which we were able to prove that with 3 different electronic medical record systems, we were able to aggregate using mock patient data and patient consent management, getting it into a gateway where we enabled the very different data sources to be combined into one source. And though this was not converted into a format which made it analyzable, it nevertheless was one step forward in aggregating disparate patient health records into one service. And this has now gone on to be the heart of what the National Digital Health Mission is working towards and developing further. I did mention to you about the EQUIC program, which is the quality assurance program. If you look at the impact that we've had, we've trained 32 teams in quality improvement across the country with over 200 professionals who have utilized this. And based on this, we've had 64 of these professionals being certified as quality improvement leaders, and thereby making a exponential increase in the value that quality is done across the National Cancer Grid. And we do this in collaboration with the Stanford Medicine Group. Impact Head Neck is another integrated module on palliative care. Again, dissemination of palliative care knowledge and information across various professionals. Before I end, I want to focus a bit on the problems, and I'll take you through a few of them just to illustrate the fact that digital health is all not rosy, and we need to run it through several filters before we embrace this as the next best thing. We do realize that health data is very clunky, and the fact that it comes from very varying sources, many of whom do not have standards of collecting data, does make this very difficult to combine into a common database. And this is probably something that industry, device manufacturers and the regulators probably should put some thought into, to have uniformity of data creation as well as collation. The lack of quality data and the privacy concerns are aspects which many previous speakers have already spoken about, but again, important to realize that these are issues that we need to address. The lack of common standards when it comes to deriving or accessing data from devices, the interoperability between these devices as well as electronic medical records, the validation, and I'll come to that with the final example a bit later, where often the technology overtakes the science, and we often compromise the rigid structure of how we do clinical trials for the sake of expediency, and we allow surrogate markers which may not necessarily be true in the real life world. And I think in some areas we need to be conscious of the fact that tech may actually deepen disparities instead of reducing them, which was the original goal. And I'm reminded of this quote which the chief scientist at WHO, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, made about digital technology. She said, if digital technologies are to be sustained and integrated into health systems, they must be able to demonstrate long-term improvements over the traditional ways of delivering health services. So for all of us who are converts to digital health, this might seem a very rudimentary and a very basic comment to make, but I think it goes at the heart of what public health systems are all about. It's no longer about the tech. It's no longer about whether there are incremental improvements in the technology, but unless you have an impact on the real world, these digital health solutions are not really improvements. I'll come back to this example, which actually got published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the Apple Watch study. Again, in collaboration between Apple, it was funded by Apple, run by the Stanford medicine researchers. Over 400,000 participants followed up over 8 months with a median of 117 days, of which 0.5% received notifications, which meant that they had some abnormality in their heart rhythm, which they received a notification for. And there was 84% concordance with atrial fibrillation, which is a potentially life-threatening illness. So clearly showing that even with very strong technology, you need to validate them in the real world before adopting them as routine. But even after such a story, we very soon, within 2 to 3 years of the study getting published in the New England Journal, we started getting warning signals where some limitations were identified, which are not identified in the original study. Another study which looked at whether people under the age of 55, which is actually the target age, right? I mean, these are the people who are most likely to wear these devices. And in those, it failed much more than it did in those above the age of 55. And in people younger than 55, the Apple Watch positive predictive value was just under 20%. Though 84% concordance was achieved by the original study, the real life situation showed that in people younger than 55, it was a much lower positive predictive value. And again, newer studies which show that when your heart rate is over 120, which is a more risky kind of atrial fibrillation, the Apple Watch just can't catch it. So not only is the validation process important and needs to be robust, but following them up in the real world also is extremely important. And this is something that I will harp upon because this is something which is not done when most newer technologies are adopted in the real world. So this is my final slide. To summarize, I'm a big champion of digital health. It has exciting possibilities to practically all stakeholders. It truly has the potential to democratize health and healthcare. It benefits or has again the potential to benefit all the stakeholders involved in health, but quality, validation and access should be the filters that we run every single advance which we promote under digital health. And if it passes these three filters, it's probably ready for prime time. And the most exciting part about digital health to me is that it can, for many countries, especially the low middle income countries, it can help leapfrog an entire generation of medical advances, which high income countries have painfully gone through. And this is the exciting potential, which to me, digital health is clearly the science of tomorrow. I'll stop with this for now, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Pramesh, for a very interesting and informative talk about digital health and the recent advances in digital health. Questions? Any questions from the audience?
As we wait for others to ask questions, I'm always ready with some. So could I go ahead, Sudhi?
Yes, yes.
Thanks, Dr. Pramesh, for an excellent talk again. It's always a delight hearing you. Just want a more general question and more general guidance on how, based on your NCG, especially the Equip India initiative. How do you see the different entities like institutes of technology, KCDH specifically, right? You have NGOs on the other hand, foundations, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, there are many other foundations. And there's government, central and state. Then there are hospitals. And I'm kind of mixing the frontline workers, ASHA workers with hospitals, but yes, you can also think of them as also two different buckets. And finally, the software industry, the professionals, right? And also consortiums on that front. How do they play complementary roles? I think it's very important to identify this, maybe have some discussion across them. Given that, NCG in some sense has also been a seed for ABDM, right? They've taken it as a strong precedent, but isn't it an important thing to discuss across the board and identify the roles they should be playing?
Most certainly. And I think right from about 2 to 3 years after the NCG was initiated, we did realize this, the importance of doing so. So while, to be honest, when we started the NCG, it was meant to be only cancer centers and at the beginning only government cancer centers, we have rapidly evolved over the last 10 years. So we went on to include private healthcare providers as well, because we realized that a large part of India's cancer management actually happens in private sector. Then we moved on to include research institutions. So IIT Bombay, for example, is a member of the National Cancer Grid. There are several standalone research institutions which are part of the National Cancer Grid, and I'm hopeful that KCDH, also independent of the IITB, will play an important role in the way the NCG evolves in digital health over the next decade or so. And again, NGOs, our partnership with Ayushman Bharat, our partnership with the DBT, all of this emphasize that it is so no single player, whether it is a healthcare provider, a healthcare professional, government, can reach success on its own. And I'm very often reminded of this, and I do use this slide very often in my talks. The teamwork that happens during a Formula One pit stop. So Formula One pit stop takes about 2.3 seconds, and over the course of 2.3 seconds, you turn over 4 tires remove 4 tires, put in 4 tires. You can actually have the nose changed of a Formula One car, and there's this huge group of around 15 to 20 people hovering around the car, each playing their own single role. And to me, that is the essence of what healthcare should be all about. And if we are able to crack this, the fact that we work cohesively with these various stakeholders without stepping on each other's toes, each of them realizing their own role in it and playing it to perfection, I think there are no boundaries to where we will reach. And this is something that I would very strongly urge.
Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question. So I know this cancer treatment is like lot of follow-up treatment. People have to come back. Otherwise, there's a chance of it recurring and everything. So with this virtual era, I mean, this do you think it is going to be easier? I mean, little bit ease this follow-up, getting appointments, people will come back.
So absolutely. I think thanks to COVID, so there was this huge reluctance amongst patients as well as providers to rely purely on a virtual follow-up system. What if I miss something which the patient has? What if there is some finding which, because I have not examined the patient, I will miss out? But I think to a large extent, it has been laid to rest by the fact that COVID forced this upon us. And now we find patients and providers being far more comfortable with using these tools much more than it ever was. So I think it's here to stay, and it is actually a very good sign as far as healthcare access is concerned, because you no longer have the need to travel long distances to be able to access expert care. And this is something that's very, very important.
So can we say that the indirect healthcare cost will go down due to this?
So I think at least with telemedicine, it's very clear that indirect health costs will go down. What we need some more confidence and clarity upon is the fact that outcomes are not compromised. And I think these are very specific to each situation. So for example, if you had someone with very advanced metastatic cancer, missing something getting missed on that follow-up, probably it doesn't mean that much. But if somebody has a potentially life-threatening complication happening which requires acute care, if that gets missed, then I think that's something that we need to be conscious about. So continuing to collect data on all of these interventions is very important, as we saw with the Apple Watch example, even if it's been proven in robust studies.
Thank you. I have one more question. I have read that in tuberculosis there is a discrimination in men and women healthcare. Like it's like a stigma for women, especially unmarried women. So in Indian cancer healthcare, is there any kind of such discrimination, do you think?
So in some situations, yes. So when we looked at our own pediatric cancer data, we found that more boys were getting treated as compared to girls. And this is contrary to most of the data available in other societies globally, where girls are actually a higher number to get treated than the boys, primarily because there are some cancers which are more common in them. And to some extent it does happen. But again, there's been some very real world solutions that we found to this by creating an environment in pediatric care which ensures that patients don't lose their livelihood, parents don't lose their livelihood, children don't, the costs of cancer care for children doesn't bankrupt the parent. And this is thanks to some of the NGOs that we work with. For example, St. Jude's is a classic example, who provide accommodation services, education for students, education for the children, job opportunities for the parents, and so on, thereby creating a holistic solution wherein treatment abandonment is reduced. And we've been able to flip this, the ratio of girls to boys being treated to almost reach a neutral level.
Thank you. Yeah.
Not digital health, but a very effective solution.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Yeah. Any more questions? From
I don't have a question. I just wanted to comment that wonderful session. Nice to meet you, Dr. Pramesh, online, and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. Thank you very much, Dr. Prasad.
So I can see a raised hand from Aniruddha, Mr. Aniruddha. Do you want to ask a question? Yeah, maybe you can increase your volume. It's yeah.
Thank you. That's a really good question, and it goes to the heart of what we describe as a hub and spoke or a distributed model of cancer care. So what we are promoting is the fact that most of the common cancers and the less complicated cancers should be treated close to home. So this involves probably about 80% of all cancers. So a patient with a very common cancer or a cancer which has a fairly straightforward treatment solution offered to the patient should have care without having to travel long distances. On the other hand, there are some of these rarer cancers and more complicated cancers where we advocate a more centralized approach, the exact opposite of what I described earlier, which was a decentralized approach, which looks at creating these centers of excellence for rare cancers and complicated treatments. And we encourage that patients, which will then only form 20% of all of India's cancers, going to these centers of excellence, which means that the expertise, the infrastructure, the equipment that is needed to treat these cancers are localized in a particular central area. And it negates the need for creating multiple such centers in all parts of the country. So I'll take this example of proton therapy, which is an exciting new method of radiation therapy, gives highly precise, with very high doses of radiation. And this is most useful for children with brain tumors. So you must understand, and the cost of this equipment, of one equipment, is close to 400 crores of Indian rupees. So it is clearly not possible to have hundreds of these proton therapy machines across the country. So what we advocate here is a more central form of treatment where all children with pediatric tumors, which is actually a pretty rare disease as far as cancers go, are referred to these centers of excellence, and thereby you use these resources more optimally. Right. So in a number of situations, yes, where it doesn't depend upon the actual expertise. If it is a skill-based situation. So, for example, for complex surgery, for example, we have still not reached the phase where you have virtual surgery being performed across large distances. But whereas when it comes to diagnostics, this is certainly something that can happen. Using AI, using diagnostic tools with AI, with pathology, you can certainly make this available locally. But again, coming back to this situation of infrastructure. So if you needed a patient to be treated with proton therapy, this is not something that you could do in 100 centers across. So it would be a nuanced answer to that. For certain diagnostics situations where the treatment can be offered close, but the diagnostic tools are not available everywhere, we certainly could leverage AI. Having said that, I am aware of some newer advances, even with remote surgery. So it's not too far-fetched, but it's not ready for prime time just yet.
Any more questions? Okay, so thank you, Dr. Pramesh, for the talk. Now I would like to invite Professor Ganesh Ramakrishnan, our PIC, to give the vote of thanks.
Thanks again, Dr. Pramesh. Thanks, Professor Sudeep Gupta, Mr. Girish Raghavan, Dr. Pramesh, for very enlightening talks. I think this was a very enriching session overall. And it's also interesting that we've kind of completed this in record time. We've completed before time. This also speaks volumes of how valuable the time of our doctors are. So we should all learn to value their time. I'd also like to invite the audience to a couple of sessions we're going to have later in the day. In fact, right now we're going to have some student posters. I'm just going to bring up this slide. So we'll have poster competition by students until 12:10 p.m. Followed by industry talks at 12:10. We'll have Mr. Nipun Virmani, co-founder RIA, and then these are shorter talks. And then the industry talk 2 by Mr. Shashank Chilamkurti, founding member of Cure.ai. We'll again, like we had the morning keynote talks, we'll have evening keynote talks at 7 and 8 respectively by Professor Bhramar Mukherjee at 7 and then by Dr. Nitish Thakur at 8. Between 5 and 7:20 p.m. we'll have spotlights on research projects funded by KCDH. Several of them are collaboration with Tata Memorial Hospital and several other reputed hospitals. There are 14 projects, 10 minutes each. So with that note, I would like to thank again the speakers. I look forward to continued interaction of this sort. Thanks, Dr. Pramesh. Thanks, Dr. Sudeep, and thanks, Girish.
Thank you, Ganesh. So now we need to join a new link or just continue on this?
No, link will be same. Link will remain same.
Okay.
So I think our poster presenters are also with us. Am I right? Abu? One is Abu and another is Abhilash. Yeah. Okay. So if
should we follow
Dr.
time
Nirmal is also ready, then we can start right now.
Yeah, we can start.
Yeah, Dr. Nirmal, you are there?
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. And our presenters are also with us, so we can start that session, poster competition session right now. Okay. Is that okay, participants? Abu and Abhilash?
I think that'll be great. We can get started right now. We'll have a little more time for interaction.
Yes. So I request to Dr. Nirmal to proceed this session. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Nirmal.
Dr. Rashmi, or is there a sequence like Abhilash is going first or Abu?
Abu is going to first, followed by Abhilash.
Okay. So is Abu here?
I think he has not joined it, but his name is... Yeah, he's there. Abu, can you respond, please? His
Hello.
name is in the list.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, you are audible.
Hello.
You are audible, Abu.
Hello.
You are very much audible.
Hello, ma'am. How could I present my chart in front of you?
Dr. Nirmal?
Hello.
Could you?
Abu, you can see the share screen option on your Teams.
Yes.
Yeah, so you
Yes,
can
yes,
click
yes.
on
Rashmi, just
share.
make them in a presenter, right? You can make them as presenters.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Sure. Sorry. So,
Abu, are you able to share your screen?
yes, so I'm able to see. I'm sorry for being late, but I'm trying to connect. Share
Yeah,
the
that's
screen.
fine.
Is my screen is visible to you? Oh,
Not yet.
okay. स्क्रीन शेयर नहीं हो रही है कैसे स्क्रीन शेयर करेगा था अभी तुम्हारा वो काम है पीछे इसका बोले यार शुरू कर हेलो
Us extrude out and pressurizing on the nerves leading to excruciating pain. Can this be created in the laboratory or not? So biggest challenge was not only this is a simple ring like structure, but they have a cross aligned 30-degree structure, which is very important for them being a soft tissue yet behaving like a hard tissue. So we wanted to replicate that in toto, and we initially did with the device that we have created for which we have an US patent. But we realized that if we do this, we may not be able to cater or bring or make enough number of intervertebral discs which and replicate them. So now we have resorted to making in through 3D bioprinting, where the dimensions can be taken from the patients, and within less than 30 minutes we can now create these intervertebral discs, both cellular and cellular, using stem cells, patients autologous stem cells. We can create them, and these are very viable in terms of mechanical, in terms of biological consequences we have looked at, in terms of biocompatibility. Now we are doing more of the animal studies to validate this in terms of functionality. So this is what is the story for the intervertebral disc. The last one is on the bioengineered knee meniscus. Similar to the IVD, the knee meniscus is a soft tissue which is a load bearing tissue. It is in fact in between joints of all bones, but majorly in between the long bones in the legs, and it is a C-shaped structure. Now it is a problem statement for
the time. We will only give 5 minutes. And when you want to zoom, just say us. We will zoom to the portion. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. You can start your presentation.
Yes. So, good morning, one and all. I'm very happy to be here and presenting at TRIM as a memorial to Rinti ma'am. And I've seen her biography, and I'm very inspired by the things she has done and her work. Uh, so, coming to the poster presentation, it is titled as Classification of Urinary Bladder Cancer Using Deep Learning. And urinary bladder cancer is also urothelial cancer, and it is one of the most important, most commonly common cancers apart from squamous cell carcinoma in the urinary bladder. So why is it important? It is fairly underdiagnosed in India and the world, and it is increased by cigarette smoking. It is more common in males as compared to females, and it is fairly diagnosed late in the progression of the disease, and that is a poor prognostic factor. The main reason is the person does not identify the signs of these cancers. They are mainly hematuria and slight pain, which is not present in all of the cases. So why is this project important? Because we are using AI software which is objective to diagnose these type of cancer, which is done after a procedure known as transurethral resection of bladder tissue, or TURBT. And we use a CNN based learning so that it is objective across the many classes of urinary bladder cancer. So mainly we are looking at low grade and high grade. And why is it important to classify? Because it makes a difference in the treatment of the patient. So low grade will just have a TURBT procedure and every yearly annual follow-up. While in high grade, you need to remove the whole bladder, which is known as a radical cystectomy. So the treatment varies uh, it varies very deeply from low grade to high grade cancers. So the main aim was to take the pathology slides, which are hematoxylin and eosin stained slides, take the patches out of it, and feed it into a CNN or a deep learning based architecture so that we get a final output, whether it is low grade or high grade. There is substantial variation, subjective variations of each pathologist if it says low grade and high grade. And usually about 20 to 30% of cancers are misdiagnosed as high grade or in a different class. So there are few features which are seen at high grade and at low power magnification and at high power magnification. And we use the CNN to diagnose based on both these features. So if we can zoom into uh, the first figure, which is on the bottom left of the poster, we can see the gradual the yes, that figure. So we can see the how a CNN works. We use the patch of a big image, here a whole slide image, and feed it into a convolutional layer of the CNN. Ultimately, it goes to a pooling layer, and the final output is produced after the fully connected layer. And it classifies into a low grade or a high grade in any of the two classes. So here it was a two-class problem. So we got into low grade or high grade. We used about 20 patients, the slides of 20 patients of urothelial cancer, and they were low grade or high grade. And we trained the model based on the patches which were extracted from these 20 patients. So it came out into thousands of patches after patch extraction. So coming to the figure 2 and figure 3, I will show you the low grade and high grade, how it differs. So these are the patches which are taken from low grade and high grade. We can see the cells are very uniform in the low grade. Their polarity is maintained. The nucleus is small in size. There is not much ATPI in the low grade, which is the figure 2, left side. So at low magnification and higher magnifications, we can see that the nuclei are very similar in size to each other. On the right hand side in figure 3, it is high grade. So we can see the nuclei are not maintaining monophasic, they are not similar to each other. There is much ertypia, there is much pleomorphism, and they are looking very big as compared to the left hand side. So it is high grade urothelial cancer. How do we diagnose it? Mainly right now, it is by hematoxylin and eosin stained slides. There is no IHC, there is no ancillary studies. There are molecular studies, but they are not effective in all the cases. And hence, a companion diagnostic tool like a AI-based screening tool will be very much effective in such a cancer. It is fairly underdiagnosed in India, and such a AI-based tool, if has to go in market, needs a very high accuracy. In our study, we got about 90% of accuracy after the CNN
Aniruddha,
classification. Yes, ma'am. Yeah,
it's
just
almost. Yeah,
winding it up.
just
And the,
wind up.
yes,
Yeah.
and the final is visualization. So we did heat map visualization of how the CNN works, and we saw the red hotspots is what the CNN takes up as cancer. So we can see on the left hand and the right hand side in low grade and high grade how it took up on the cancer in the figure 4. So this is my conclusion that 90% of accuracy was achieved, and it is a objective method as a companion diagnostic tool to classify low grade and high grade urothelial cancer. Thank you.
Next. Next we have Nidhi, I think. Nidhi Gupta. Nidhi, are you here? Nidhi. Thank you for your presentation, Anirudh. You can switch off the camera. Your
Thank you.
camera and voice. Nidhi Gupta. Nidhi, are you here?
algorithms to extract data from images, convert it into text. For us, medical layer comes in and trying to codify it using these medical data standards. And then, of course, apply medical rules and validation to make sure that anything that they have actually makes sense. That's an important step as it continues to evolve and more data is available to us. AI also starts to come into the picture and solve this problem. Now, once we standardize some of this data, right, what I just described to you was that we took some data from various sources, labs, customer history, hospitals, so on. We applied some medical coding standards. We brought it into a standard form in our data platform. There was additional customer data we have around customers, and then using that standard health record, we mounted it to a core insurance and health underwriting health platform, which we use for various use cases, underwriting, distribution, claims, and improving health. So let me take one use case and tell you a little bit more about what health insurance underwriting is and how do we use that standard health record. So for those of you not familiar with health insurance underwriting, it's basically the process by which usually a Medicaid claim person or often a medical doctor will take your health insurance application with all your health records that you might have to them. They look at it, they evaluate it, they try to gauge your health risk, and based on that decide whether or not they want to give you an insurance policy or what kind of pricing. Now, this is a complex procedure. It takes time. Sometimes human underwriters are sitting and processing hundreds of applications manually every day. In some cases, it may take 7 days to get a decision back on your application. So, once we standardize the health data and we understand what are some of the conditions in your body, if we look at this on screen, you see says if you had this condition represented by this code in the past, and there is some standard duration that we know that you had it for or had it in the past, this rule set will make a decision to say yes, let's accept this risk or let's you need to conduct further tests or it needs to be rejected for certain reasons. So rather than having human underwriters look at all this data manually, we're able to start to simplify, make the process quicker and faster through these kind of rules for now. And there are about 4 lakh medical rules that we've created around this. You can imagine the complexity when you may have multiple conditions and so on and so forth. And then gradually as we get more and more data, we build more intelligence and on top of that. So one example of how standardized health records can help us improve health insurance. Another example is in health claims. So one of the biggest complaints that people have about health insurance is that when you go into a hospital, when you're in a time of need, that's when some of these insurers don't come to your help, right? They take hours and hours, they make you sit there, do paperwork, and they might say, no, this is rejected for XYZ reason, or they may not even give you a reason. And then that's really not a time when you want to sit and wait and have to deal with all of this. So in a similar manner to what I described, when claims data, which is a lot of it is health data, comes into the system, you can digitize it, you can start to classify it, code it up using the health data standards, and then pass it through an engine where you can map it with a person's insurance policy. So for example, in this case I mentioned a person came in with a severe pneumonia and pneumonia has a ICD code of J13. You can look up the insurance policy and very quickly make a determination saying, hey, yes, this is okay to approve and go ahead and instantaneously pass the claim and send details back to the provider. And so trying to make this easier and faster for a customer and improve the process of insurance. One final example that I do have is how do we use data comes in, right? Think about your activity trackers and your medical records from labs, and as more and more data comes in, there are these clinical pathways and algorithms and all kinds of intelligence that researchers and organizations and startups around the world are building on top of some health data, which they're using to predict or to try to drive interventions in advance on people. And so having this standardized health data, which is fairly universal because it's using the same coding standard, allows us and others to use these kind of models, use these clinical pathways. The one you see here is actually one we have pulled from an international organization, and allows us to then drive intervention in healthcare. For example, if someone shows an increase in weight, blood pressure, you can perhaps this pathway may suggest an adjustment in the diet or a change in medication, thereby obviously trying to make a customer healthier. And, So, to summarize, of course, I wanted to just introduce everyone to a small part of what Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission's data standardization recommendations are and why they're important and how we are trying to use it as a startup in this space to drive improvements in health insurance and health outcomes for people as well. There's plenty of more, just scratching the surface, but would love to answer any questions anyone might have. Thanks again to IIT Bombay and KCBH having me.
Thanks a lot, Nipun. Any questions from the audience? So I have a question. So Nipun, this entire data standardization, format standardization exercise, that's quite a huge and has many stakeholders. So what are some of the most, or which are some of the most challenging stakeholders, and how do you think they can also be brought in under, they can also learn about the benefits of data standardization, and how do we drive that change?
One of the most challenging ones that we see today is actually the EHR and EMR space, because India, in terms of health record systems, even in hospitals, and I'm only considering, say, the India ones of the lot, right? The hospitals which do have some kind of systems out there, the space is very fragmented. There are hundreds of different systems being used, and so there's barely any standardization. Investing in some of the tech to start to standardize is also expensive for them, right? So where there is motivation to use a system, even there it's often expensive, and we'll have to see how the government recommending all of this. It is going to be a little bit of a gradual evolution to get there. Now, obviously, beyond that, I know that Ayushman Bharat, through its own health program and mission, is trying to take some of the data at the grassroots level that it does have and try to act on it. I don't know too much about the quality of data. I have heard various things from people, so that I won't get into that side of things. But focusing on the part where there is some kind of digitization initiative already happening, that I think is one of the more
Generally happens. And are there like any compelling economic advantages for this digitization to, let's say, small pharmacies or small clinics, if not in the short term, in the medium term, that can be used to convince them?
That's a great question. I think would have to think about that a bit more. But I mean, I think since you thought about pharmacies, one of the things that the government is trying to also do is to create a standardized drug registry as part of this digitization. And so by having, say, a standardized drug registry where you can start to easily look at prescriptions and figure out what helps, what drugs need to be given without confusion. I think that part could lead to less errors. However, at the same time, we do know we're in an ecosystem where there's a lot of things happening off the books, and there's a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse in the system. Now, some of that, I would say that fortunately does end up helping small pharmacies and so on. So it's an interesting question, and we'll have to see how we can drive better economics to have a good answer.
Thanks, Professor Ganesh. Go ahead with your question. Thanks. Yeah, your answer. Thanks for a nice talk, Mr. Nipun. Your answer actually led me to the next question. So, given SNOMED and other kinds of standard efforts towards standardization, what is the scope for building in Indian languages? I mean, should it be translation? Should it be transliteration? Have there been standards that you've been part of there? And what is your experience overall dealing with multilinguality?
Sorry, can I clarify the question? So I'm just wondering, when you're talking about the standard, your question that should we look at an Indian standard, or your question around, say, the
dealing with multilinguality, like the point of standardization is drug names, right? But then with diseases, with ailments, with many other common nouns, maybe not even proper nouns, right? You need Indian language equivalents. Right. I mean, I know that there is some effort from the ABDM and others to have a SNOMED localized, right? Localization. So, what has been your on-ground experience with Indian language incorporation for common nouns, for verbs, etc.?
Yeah, actually, I was in a conversation about a couple of weeks ago with a much larger ecosystem provider, a platform in the Indian ecosystem. And they've actually started looking at some of the language based customization on top of the existing ICTs and SNOMED. So rather than trying to build a new system, they're also looking at, okay, what are the various commonly used, and you have to start with the 80-20, right? So you pick the most common, the occurring conditions and so on, and you start to try to create mappings of those. So I think that's where some of the industry, and we've not reached that point, but that's what we're seeing some of the industry starting to do. And there definitely is a need, but there, what they have is that they still have doctors that work for them. So it's a more controlled environment, right? So they're able to look at, again, narrow the problem even more and more, and say that for the common cold, what are the various terms, and let's start with a localized geographical area, then we sort of expand it out. I think that's how they're going, but I'd be fascinated to see if some of the things happening in terms of localization globally, in terms of technology, and so you and other people in IIT are leading a lot of interesting research and work out there to see if one's able to kind of even map medical terms like that.
Thanks for that. So, would you be actually interested in collaborating with KCDH on the angle of multimodal input, audio input, and also languages, multiple languages? Is it something interesting? Because we have many other faculty members.
Yeah, let's take that offline. He's very enthusiastic about collaboration, but let's not put him on the spot here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Happy to take that offline. Thanks.
Nice talking to you.
Any last questions? Great. Thanks a lot, Nipun.
Right. Thank you.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Shashank Chilamkurti. He is an alumnus of IIT Bombay, and he has had quite an illustrious career so far, and hopefully going forward as well. He's a founding member and AI scientist at Cure.ai, which is one of the most successful medical imaging startups in the world. Perhaps it's not even no longer a startup. It's now it has FDA approvals and so forth. He's also a co-author of PyTorch AI framework,
and his work involves deep learning on medical images obtained from radiology. And his passion lies at the intersection of AI, healthcare, and open source technology. He has contributed to the development of AI in healthcare and is instrumental in development of QER, which is a neuro AI tool. Over to you, Shashank.
Thanks for the interesting Professor CT. I'm like really blessed to be here. I think thanks for inviting me, KCDH. Being part of the alumni, yeah, I've been part of the electrical engineering as well, which Professor CT works in, right? So I'm really blessed to be here. I mean, to be honest, like a lot of stuff I learned from IIT Bombay, I literally apply them, like radon transform, posterior spares, which a lot of convex optimization courses that I have been part of. Professor Ganesh is actually taught me that course, who just asked me a question. Who just asked a question, right, to the previous speaker. I'm really blessed to be here. So what I'm gonna do, let me, can you guys see my screen? Yes. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to give you a pitch slash presentation of one of our, more specific products. So this is, for example, a pitch, a presentation I have given in a neurology department. So you can understand. So basically the idea is that I'm going really deep. Instead of giving you like upar ka funda, instead of giving you just about basic stuff, I want to dig deep and explain you like more neuroscience work that we ended up having to do. Right? So I'll do that because as part of, so if you're a healthcare startup, you will realize very quickly that there is the details. You will quickly realize that's where most fun is as well, right? So that's what I will go deep into. Instead of giving you more philosophical or abstract things, I'll go really deep, right? So before that I'll just intro what we do, right? At Cure.ai, basically what we do is we apply artificial intelligence, deep learning on medical images, basically X-rays, CT scans, ultrasounds, right? So right now, we have just raised, by the way, a 40 million round last week or a week before. So fairly well funded. We have about 100 plus employees, 150 employees today. Interestingly, we have, unlike other places, other AI startups in the space, we have very narrow focus on disease areas. Because again, devil is in the details, and each disease and each condition is different from other conditions. And we are a AI guys, data scientist dream. We have largest repository of 1 billion images. 1 billion, sorry. I think I called it 1 billion. It's actually a 1 billion images that we have internally that we use to train our models. And every year we basically process 200 million images. Right? So this is the overall different AIs that we have. We have an AI on CT of brain, we have AI on CT of lung, and we have an AI of X-ray of chest. So I'm going to specifically talk about, basically brain related stuff, neuroscience. Right, and then we also have, we realize that it's also important for us to not just have AI, but to have a complete end-to-end solution. I'll talk about this as well in more detail. But overall, so this is the kind of footprint that we have today. We are in about 50 countries now. We have operations there. We have about 400, I think it's 500 now, 500 plus sites across the world that are using our AI. So we impact about 10,000 patients every day. And I think, we are actually probably instrumental in at least actually impacting lives. Sorry, actually impacting critical, maybe 10,000 people, right? I can probably confidently say I have saved them using the algorithms that we built. Right, and this is different people that we work with, a lot of ministries of health, a lot of universities, Indian health, a lot of Indian places as well, Niti Aayog, all these people we work with, Gates Melinda Foundation, right? And we are very research heavy. We publish a lot, quite a bit. So we have 37 plus journal peer-reviewed publications. If you count conference publications, I think it will be like 150 something. I think this month alone we submitted 6. In March alone we submitted 6 conference proceedings. So we are very, very active in terms of, I think the 4 patents is now 6 US patents. So super active in terms of science. So collaborate quite a bit with a lot of people around the world. I think one of the best papers we have is the Lancet one. I don't know if you guys remember the, I mean, if you guys know about the Lancet, I'd say it's the most prestigious medicine journal in the world, right? For example, all the vaccine trials, right, they get published in the Lancet. It's that impactful. So we have got our AI stuff published there. So this is in general about cure. I will talk more about stroke. I will talk specifically stroke. Maybe I'll do a brief overview of what stroke is and how the stroke treatment works. The stroke is essentially part of your brain not getting blood. Let's keep it very straightforward. So heart attack, if you know, is basically your heart itself, heart muscles itself not getting blood. Right? That's what heart attack is, and therefore your heart is dying, and your heart has stopped working. Similarly, brain stroke, also called as brain attack, is when brain is not getting blood, and because brain is such an important part of the body, if the brain doesn't get blood, the person will die very quickly. Right? It's as in, I mean, so if you don't treat the stroke patient within maybe a day or two, and you kept them without any care, they will die. Patients will die. It's really life-threatening condition, right? And thankfully, there are treatments, and more treatments are coming. More treatments are already proven in this space. I will talk more about the exact treatments. But overall, so how the stroke patient is treated is also important to understand this discussion where I'm going to. So by the way, why I am going through this is because this is how our data scientists and our engineers and everybody in Cure thinks. We think we have to think extremely intense into actual clinical area, and then we also have to be good with data science and stuff. This is basically the bread and butter of us. So that's the reason why I'm giving you a taste of how working in AI startup in healthcare looks like, right? So I'm just going into one deep dive, doing a deep dive to give you the taste. So how the treatment look like is patient comes to the stroke center, right? Through the ambulance. Is there a question? I think I hear some echo. Is there a question? No. Okay.
No, I think someone accidentally unmuted themselves. I will mute them.
Got it. No issues. So how it works is just on the matter. Yeah. How it works is basically a stroke patient comes to the stroke center, and then what happens is basically they will be evaluated whether it's stroke or not. Then they will immediately be taken to a CT scanner, where they will be taken a CT scan. So CT scan, computed tomography, right? And then radiologist will be looking at this CT scan. And he will give his opinion to the emergency doctor who looks at the, who basically ordered the CT, who was in charge of the patient. So emergency doctor confirms that yes, this is a stroke, and yes, this is this kind of stroke. Then he calls a neurologist, and he calls a neurologist. Neurologist is basically a doctor who is specialized in brain-related stuff. Neurologist again looks for this, looks after all the data that is generated so far, whatever analysis of emergency doctor, radiology, CT scan, and the patient symptoms. He looks at all this information and he makes it. So he then decides, okay, what treatment do I give to this patient? So there are two kinds of treatments to the treatments that can be given to the a stroke patient. Number one is medical treatment, which is there is this specific drug called as TPA, right, or altiplase. So this particular what it does is this dissolves the blood, and then there is another set of treatment called as thrombectomy, which is more surgical. It's minimally invasive surgery. So surgeon will basically insert a catheter into the vessels, artery, and then will pull the clot out, right? So you don't need to know exact details, but know that there are two kinds of treatments. and neurologist basically makes a decision. Both of them are not lightly taken. So you'll have it's not like just give aspirin kind of thing. It's a lot more complicated than that. So neurologist basically decides based on all the information, and then he calls up surgeon who actually does the surgery in case it is required, right? So as you can see, this is I think briefly informative of pretty much like any kind of treatment that you get. It involves like many people. Okay? Like if you do any complicated, if you go with any complicated disease such as stroke, this is the kind of process that is followed. It involves multiple people. It involves like multiple data crunching. And then all things it's not different. So they have to fall into, for example, the information, all the scenarios that you see, these are literally calling, hey, CT guy, can you please about the situation of the stroke guy? He requires then the CT scan guy get a call with you saying, radiologist, important thing is tell me what's up with this patient and call. And the radiologist will then call the doctor and website. So things like this, right? In general, the way which we do, and we try to fit in this. The way we want to fit in how we use technology, help them with AI. So this like many arrows which requires a lot of data. So all that is made by AI, and then there is no definition of the stroke is a different. So there are and then support and collaborate them with consultation. So this is the way we imagine arrive to the stroke center, and as soon as we arrive, we know about the patient. And then we take it to the CT scan, so the people that will be available on the app, patient that will transfer to all the people at the same time, all the different what exactly they want, and then they can collaborate. Right? So this is the course, and I will in the interest of time, I will how it actually stop this. So this is actual screenshot of our app. So how it works. So as soon as the take some of the information what's the name and information, patient information, followed by very stroke specific information. What's the blood pressure? What's the SpO2 ratio? Now we heard of SpO2 now. What's the blood glucose levels? When was the patient last well-known time? And then there is this stroke scale, very specific form for stroke alone. This is called as National Institute of Health Stroke Scale. So there you basically ask questions like what's the level of consciousness, whether the patient is drowsy or alert or is in coma, right? And then you ask like, okay, how about you ask patient to close the eyes? Is he able to close the eyes? Is he able to like give you like if you ask him correct month and what's his age, he's able to answer that, right? So basic, stroke related questions. This is so this will be filled by the emergency doctor as before the CT scan is taken. And then as soon as the CT scan is taken, it will be sent to our app, which you can look at the CT scan and also AI related findings and AI. So all this information, right? So this is FDA approved. AI will run the algorithm on the CT scans and will tell you what kind of abnormality is there in the brain, whether it's an intrabrain, different types of stroke or different types of trauma. Basically, a CT interpreted, right? This is super duper accurate, 97%. Plus accuracy. If you're, I think I can put up the term AUC, which is one of the accuracy metrics, right? And it's trained on like 2.2. It's trained on billion plus images, super duper accurate. As probably as accurate as a resident, somebody who just got, who is not too experienced in the radiology, right? So it can detect like 12 abnormalities, and it can basically create a fairly fully automated report. So this is on something called as non-contrast CT. Not only that, it can also quantify, for example, how much bigger bleed is, right? And it can also quantify, for example, if you know the brain is symmetrical. So brain left and right are symmetrical, but in this case, you see that this is not symmetrical. The left part of the brain is not same as right part of the brain. So we actually quantify this symmetry. It's called as midline shift. So we actually quantify how asymmetric. So this is something called as herniation of brain. So we quantify the herniation, and we can tell you like all this super quickly in your app. So then there is this specific type of stroke called as ischemic stroke. There is also something called as aspect score, which can help you identify early signs of stroke, right? Even before it can be seen on CT. So it can eliminate. Basically, this eliminates a subjective. This aspect score is fairly subjective in terms of humans, but AI will eliminate the subjectivity that is involved because it is dumb and it will give you same result for the same patient, right? So this is the aspect score map. I mean, I will not go into exact details of what this aspect score is, but this allows you to take the decision on whether, okay, this patient is ischemic stroke patient, and then, okay, when this patient has aspect score this much, so now should I get this patient say later treatment or surgery? Right? And this is very useful in case you only have limited information. But you can also get more information called as. So what you do is inject so-called contrast. So if you inject the contrast, you can basically see the vessels. Right? You can see the vessels of the brain. You can see, for example, like all the white stuff, right? That's basically you can see that this is again asymmetrical. On the right side of the image, you are able to see the vessels, but on the left, this same vessel is missing. So this is something called as large vessel occlusion. So a significant part of the brain is not getting bled, and this you can treat this with surgical kind of treatment called as trauma. So this image is generated, and automatically we can say whether this is a large vessel occlusion or not using AI. So this MIP, what you see is called as maximum intensity projection, and it requires some AI stuff. I will not go deep, but this can also be created using AI, and we basically detect whether this large vessel occlusion is present or not. Right? And then finally, most interesting, there is so not only do you want to know if you want to treat a stroke patient whether whether this is an ischemic stroke or not, whether there's a large vessel occlusion or not. You also want to know if you do surgery or intervention, whether the patient will actually recover. So for this, you do this. I hope you have. I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard about this fMRI thing. Similar to fMRI, there is this functional imaging called as CT perfusion. So what this CT perfusion does is it tracks flow of blood using contrast in your brain, right? It tracks your contrast, it tracks your blood flow, and it will create basically something called as Tmax and CPF, fairly technical terms. What these do is, for example, this area Tmax, right? This shows which part of the, so this is, by the way, this is all automatically generated. This does not, you don't see them from the, this is all AI generated outputs. So what you see here is this part of the brain is dead. So this part of the brain, like even if you do any treatment, you are not going to do anything with it. But here, if you see this far larger part of the brain, which is less bright, right? So this is basically salvageable area. This is not getting bled right now, but if you treat it, it will get bled. All these areas that are around, right here. So this is the core, basically, where the blood is completely, where the brain is completely dead. So basically, you can see them here. So these all you can recover, all these areas, if you treat them patient well. So this is called as perfusion imaging, and this is, by the way, it's a fun project. by primary health or secondary health center. But the doctor who is treating them, the super specialist can sit in the, if they have access to all this data and basically do a video call, he will be able to treat a stroke, really complicated disease, inpatient complicated disease, directly from a high-end center in Delhi. And this is literally what's happening. I'll skip through all this because I don't have too much time. I'll just discuss one particular, the way in which this is being used. So this is close home in Tejpur. I can also emphasize some of the US or UK, but I want to emphasize more Indian because an Indian story. So this is close home. City called as Tejpur. This is Assam. So this is hospital called as Baptist Christian Hospital. This is a 130-bed secondary care hospital in Assam. Right here, there is a high prevalence of hypertension, therefore huge amount of stroke prevalence. In fact, there is a specific type of complicated type of stroke called a hemorrhagic stroke, much harder to treat. This is actually 50% of all the stroke diseases. Huge burden, and there are a lot of challenges here. No specialist. This hospital has no radiologist, no neurologist. All the stroke patients have to be treated by a local general physician, right? Non-specialist, right? What happens now with introduction of Raj Pandya, who is sitting in Ludhiana in Punjab, right, on the completely other side of country, and he basically coordinates the treatment and tells them, hey, this patient is eligible for thrombolysis, please do thrombolysis. And this is happening right now as we speak. Right, like the patients are being impacted. So I'll quickly, I think yes, I have matched my, I will not go deep, but I'm open to questions. I'm open to discuss details of anything that you are interested to know.
Thank you, Shashank. Very interesting and very real work that is affecting people's lives. We have a couple of questions here. Aniruddha, do you want to ask your question? So his question is, what AUC is required for FDA approval?
Yes,
Does
sir.
it differ in AI for computational pathology, and is it different in India?
So number one, so I have spent about 1-2 years spending my life running clinical trials for FDA and all the other papers, clinical work I did. You need to understand that FDA is also very sophisticated with respect to understanding AI stuff. They will reject if you say AUC is my endpoint of your clinical trial. In fact, they will not be happy if it's AUC. So they will be looking at sensitivity and specificity. So if you know the debate in the AI world, it's about generalization. The generalization is a huge difficulty right now. Even if the EUC are similar, the threshold that you use to threshold saying yes or no, and the related sensitivity and specificity, they change even if the AUC number is same across different datasets. So FDA is very specific. They are very sophisticated in this respect, and they will ask you questions a lot deeper than that. So they will be asking you sensitivity, specificity. They will be asking you sensitivity and specificity for each abnormality that you're talking about, stratified by each kind of machine that you are targeting, the patient demographics, whether this, I can show you a, you know what, just give me a second. I will show you one of the clinical evaluation reports that you create.
So, just building on this question, when you say every pathology is looked at differently by FDA. So let's say if it was not a stroke, in the MRI they found, in the CT scan they found AVM or any other arteriovenous malformation. So
Yes.
would that be picked up by the AI? Would that be having the same sensitivity and specificity, or would that differ by using the same AI? So it would be a like a coincidental finding, but the patient is presenting with all the symptoms of a real hemorrhagic stroke.
So they will want you to make sure that you have these confounders in your analysis. They will want you to make sure that you are calculating sensitivity and specificity on them and show that it is reasonably good. And you don't
So
have
what is reasonably good actually? That is what I
so the
want.
reason is the way they define it is way we have defined our endpoint, right? Is that sensitivity and specificity, its confidence interval, lower bound of the confidence interval is greater than 0.8, right? So 0.8, yeah, 0.8. So that's the, so if you are getting, I hope you understand this, all the stat stuff. So basically that's the content, that's the kind of thing that they want. So it's statistically significant, high sensitivity and specificity. So if it's the sensitivity of lower confidence interval of 0.8, it will require you to have sensitivity and specificity of 0.95 something, because you're also limited by sample size calculations, because you cannot run trial with 10,000 patients. You want to run trial with like reasonably 1,000 patients. You will have 100 abnormals, and then you calculate the
Understood.
confidence.
So does the FDA mention this in their SOPs or guidelines, or they keep on changing, or is it just?
Unfortunate is or fortunate parties, they are agile. These regulators are agile. They say, I mean, because about 3 years back, they were also quite new with respect to AI. So they did not know, for example, then that performance might differ between models of the CT scanner. They were not that savvy. Now they do. Now, if you submit an AI thing, they were not checking, for example, give me stratification by number of slices of CT scanner. Now they do. And then they'll ask you to quantify sensitivity and specificity stratified by manufacturer and how recent it is. So they're also keeping them updated. So you'll have to be on the toes.
Okay.
I suppose.
So this is US FDA. Indian perspective will be different.
So the thing is, in India, there is, I think, at this point of time, the regulatory scenario is not super strong. So it's treated on par with medical devices and nothing more. What I mean by that is, think that the regulatory environment in India treats AI not very different from a CT scanner.
Okay.
Or a syringe.
Okay.
Or like a
But when you take an example of Tezpur in Assam as compared to any city in US, would the same guidelines apply?
So far as we abide by the highest guidelines, because we are, so far as
Understood.
the max report.
Okay.
So if so we'll have to work with the most regulated environment.
The most stringent, and they will apply it to the whole of the world. And one more thing, at the end of the report, do you mention that this has been diagnosed by Cure AI or something like as a companion diagnostic tool? Is that required in all the reports? And is the doctor?
Required, but we do it for the sake of sanity.
Okay.
Because we don't want to mislead the docs either.
No, understood. But do the patient have any questions about it? Is the diagnosis being made by a teleradiologist, and has QR played a role in that? Does that affect the doctor's perception in Delhi or any other secondary look by the doctor?
So initially, there's always some, I think, I will answer a bit broader than what you asked. So initially, there's always resistance. So like there'll always be some false positives and false negatives, and you want to make sure it's well communicated in terms of disclaimers that, hey, look, this requires a radiologist to double check before you make sure it's before you take complete action on the patient if you're not very confident, right? So that much we have to do disclaimer. But the way it's going on right now, from my from the customers I speak to, they say that earlier, I used to get patient in the night, and they used to take a CT scan of it, CT scan of the patient, and then I used to get called up in the night at 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the night, at, hey dude, what's up with the CT scan? Is the patient fine? Right now, what's happening right now is, as soon as we are giving AIs report to the patient, and then patient is taken to the physician who ordered the CT scan, right? Actually, like in that, you remember the graph, this emergency physician. Emergency physician is not calling anymore the doc, the radiologist. So it's it's the acceptance is, I think they're very appreciative once they get used to it. That I mean, I literally can save patient life in this. Yeah, I hope I answered.
Okay, yeah, I got it. You were showing me something on the screen. You were sharing something.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, we are already exceeding time. Let's take one more question from Professor Ganesh.
No, before
Yeah,
that,
thanks, Shashank.
I want to say hi to you.
Hi.
For teaching me convex optimization.
Hi. Oh,
and although stuff, expectation maximization, I literally use that.
okay, great. Nice to connect back to you, Shashank. Nice talk. I mean, see, when we deal with more than two classes, like NWA classification, let's say different grades of cancer, or even with stroke, I'm sure you have grades, right? Often the tendency is to ignore you often have a heavy tail, right? As such, most of these are finding needles in haystack, and then you can have thicker and thinner needles there. That's where I think the whole. I was happy to hear